Let me read to you a passage from the third chapter of St. Mark's Gospel, verses 20 to 21. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the second week in Ordinary Time. St. Mark writes, Jesus came with his disciples into the house. Again the crowd gathered, making it impossible for them even to eat. When his relatives heard of this, they set out to seize him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." That's from Mark chapter 3, verse 20 to 21. We are led to think of Christ's love. What do I mean? Well, our gospel scene takes us into what may have been a typical day in much of our Lord's public ministry. He and his disciples were given over to intense and unending work. We are told that on this day our Lord came with his disciples into the house, possibly to have a respite and to have something to eat, because the problem of getting something to eat is then specifically mentioned. But the crowds followed him, and there was no respite at all, with people thronging in and listening to him, possibly asking him questions, and presumably making countless requests. They did not have a minute to themselves, not even to catch a bite to eat. The fact that our Lord's relatives were saying that he is beside himself would suggest that the great press of the crowds was due to our Lord giving himself entirely to them. Nothing was holding him back in his gift of himself to them in his work. The crowds knew he loved them profoundly and was full of compassion for their burdens. This comes through time and again in the Gospels. From the point of view of the crowds, here they had before them a profoundly holy man with unheard of power before God. He taught with absolute authority and wielded authority over nature and the demonic world as well. He could do anything for them, and he seemed to them to be entirely accessible. The intensity of his work and the scale of his availability shows the love behind our Lord's ministry. He seemed to his relatives that he was beside himself or out of his mind. A modern saint often spoke of being mad with love for God and for all others in God. The exemplar of this is Jesus, and we have evidence of it in today's gospel. But there are further implications in our brief gospel today. Consider the ease with which our Lord's relatives presumed to set out to restrain him, saying he is out of his mind. It suggests that during our Lord's 30 years at Nazareth, he was remarkably humble, unassuming, and very much part of his family circle in town. Our Lord was unique in the greatness of his person, but he did not show it during those years. One senses from this reaction of his relatives that while they would have recognized the goodness of his person and that of his mother and foster father, his goodness did not impose itself on them. They were in no way cowed by it. Indeed, our brief gospel today suggests that they took him somewhat for granted, and this in turn suggests that our Lord accepted this attitude to him during those hidden years at Nazareth. How like so many family and community situations this is. Our Lord once said that a prophet is never accepted as such among his own. He had been a hidden Messiah, and his bursting on the public scene was the utmost surprise to his townspeople and to his relatives, with the exception of Mary, his mother. All of this reminds us how truly incarnated he, the second divine person of the Holy Trinity, really was. God became man, and as man subjected himself to all the normal laws of human and social life. He was God with us in every way, with the exception of having personal sin. Christ on one occasion described his heart. It was meek and humble. Nazareth illustrates how this was so. The contrast between his hidden and very human years at Nazareth and his spectacular public ministry as described in our gospel today was striking. Let us think of this divine Christ who is so very human. Our brief gospel scene shows Jesus pouring himself out in love for his fellow man in unremittingly intense work. Those who had known him all along in his family circle thought he was beside himself, out of his mind. Christ wishes to give himself to each of us with equal love and generosity. Let us ask for his grace and his love. Let us accept his invitation to come to him and learn from him, for he is meek and humble of heart, and we shall find rest for our souls.